like to welcome members and guests to the third meeting of Thurrock's Health and Wellbeing Board for this municipal year. Just like to remind everyone this meeting is being streamed live and it is available on the Council's website. I'd like to just note that from going forward, meetings will be held in person only due to recent technical difficulties, and we're trying to avoid that, and it's much better to have people all in the room together. We'll continue to use the flagging system, so today we'll try to keep to agenda timings as much as possible. So you have green flags and red flags, and just look over to Darren, he'll give you the signal of how much time you have remaining. In advance to the meeting, I've received quite a number of apologies. Councillor Johnson, Councillor Shinnock, Councillor Rigby, as well as Ian Wake, Alexandra Meekan, Jim Nicholson, Sheila Murphy. I'm not sure, Darren, is there any other apologies that I've missed?
Wait for me, Mark. Jeff Banks.
Yep.
And Kim James.
Jeff Banks and Kim James, thank you. Agenda item 2, minutes and action log from the July meeting is provided at page 5. There were several decisions back from June that we took. We're just going to read them out to make sure everyone's in agreement. We had decision number 49, we agreed the new terms of reference for the board. Decision 53, we acknowledged the receipt and draft joint forward plan produced by Mid and South Essex ICB and confirms it takes into account and aligns the strategies and priorities of Thurrock's Health and Wellbeing Board. Decision 54, members were commented on and noted on the contents of the joint domestic violence and abuse in context of sex and gender briefing note. Decision 55, we noted the board noted the overview provided on the complete health and wellbeing strategy, and we reviewed and commented on and approved the progress made on Domain 1 for commitments previously approved by the board, and we outlined the commitments for year 2. Finally, decision 56, July's meeting, we approved the Better Care Fund plan for 23 to 25. I don't know if any members have any comment on the accuracy of the minutes or of those decisions. No. And just quickly going through the action log, we had action 48 relating to the terms of reference, that the amendment to make sure the meetings were held on Thursday has been changed. Actions 50 and 51 relate to the weight loss and weight management services, and that's being actioned today. And action 52, the letter from the board that was requested as me as chair has been sent and actioned. I'm not sure if any other member has any comment on those actions. No. Right, agenda item 3, there's no items of urgent business that I've agreed to. So agenda item 4, would anyone like to make any declarations of interest? No, lovely. Agenda item 5, we've got no virtual items today, but do remind members that, of course, anything for information, please do give the Secretariat team a heads up, and we'll be able to provide, just make sure if you need to update the board upon anything, these are normally done virtually. Item number 6, action log response on the update of the NHS weight management services. A copy of the slides is available in page 9. I'd like to introduce Margaret to present this report. You've got 20 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Darren, are you able to share the slides for everyone? Yeah. Thank you. Lovely. So if we could move on to slide 2, please, Darren. Great, lovely, thank you. I'm very pleased to be able to bring this update on what we're doing with weight management support to people across Thurrock this morning. I think I was originally asked about the ASOP and Stamford Le Hope PCN weight management, which is included in this presentation, but I thought it might be more helpful to give a more rounded picture. So, in terms of weight management, there are 3 formal tiers to weight management. There's tier 2, tier 3 and tier 4, which is often referred to as bariatric surgery. We try to avoid as many people as possible going for bariatric surgery, and that's nothing to do with cost, it is to do with how aggressive bariatric surgery actually is. So in Thurrock, we have tier 2 weight management provision. Now tier 2, wherever it is, takes the form of a 12-week programme. And it includes healthy diets, it includes advice on the healthy eating and the eating environment, and it includes a lot of physical activity and exercise. The Stamford Le Hope and ASOP initiative is broadly based on the tier 2 provision rather than tier 3. I'll come on to tier 3 in a moment. Usually to access tier 2 provision, the person would be referred by their GP, but the programme is open to people who may self-refer and can be referred through other parts of the system, so through social workers and various other professions. The Tier 2 provision is commissioned by the Council's public health team in conjunction with partners across the borough and is delivered locally. And the rate of uptake, that's referrals that convert into a person going on to the programme, has seen an increase for men up from 10% in 2022-23 to 14% in the first quarter of 23-24, which I think is quite a positive move. Men particularly benefit from weight management programmes. Actually, they tend to do a lot better than women. In terms of Tier 3 weight management, it is a more complex service, and it involves psychological support and cognitive behavioural therapy as part of the programme. And it can be referred to by a GP. Usually, we would expect that someone would have been on a Tier 2 weight management programme before going on to a Tier 3. We are actually debating that arrangement at the moment. We find that it's not always helpful to everyone to have to go through Tier 2 before you can get to Tier 3. Tier 3 services are 12 months in duration. The first 12 weeks is a curriculum-based programme dealing with a different element on each of the 12 weeks, and then a person would go on to what we call a maintenance programme. NICE, which is the Institute for Clinical Excellence, the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, has guidance and requirements set on weight management provision, and the services in Thurrock fully meet these requirements. We actually have a single provider for the whole of South Essex, which is Thurrock, Southend, Basildon and Brentwood, and Castlepoint and Rochford. And they have been the provider now for approximately 8, maybe 9 years. We are about to start a procurement process in the late spring, early summer of next year, because we are now required to go to the market because we've had the same provider for so long. The Tier 3 provision is commissioned by Health. So it was previously CPR CCG on behalf of the whole of South Essex, and it's now in the ICB. I was actually the commissioner for the whole of Mid and South Essex for Tier 3 services until April, May of this year, when I handed it over to colleagues in an ICB central team. I'm ever so sorry about the size of the font on this. When I took it from the Excel spreadsheet, no matter what I did, I could not get it to increase in size, so I do apologise. I'm sure if you want to look at it on... sorry, Darren, we need the next slide, please. If you want to look at it in your handout, in your papers, you may actually be able to read it. However, what we've got here is some evidence of benefits from the 2022-23 outturn figures provided by our Tier 3 weight management provider, More Life, for South Essex. The target for Thurrock is to have 100 people complete the 12-month programme. And actually, in comparison to the number of people that we know in Thurrock are overweight or obese, that is really just a drop in the ocean, quite frankly, which is why we're looking at a whole new offer and a remodelling of all of the weight management services for Mid and South Essex. If we could go to slide 5, please, Darren. Again, really sorry about this. The percentage of completers, this is for Thurrock, the percentage of completers achieving 5% weight loss at 12 weeks, that's the end of the curriculum-based section of the programme, is 34 out of 93 completers. That's a target of 37%, an achievement of 37% over a target of 30%. The percentage of completers achieving 3% weight loss at 12 weeks was 60 out of 93 completers. That's 65% over a target of 60%. And the percentage of clients that completed the group, including potential completers, was 111 out of 191. So the numbers are going up, and the reason that the numbers are going up is because we've had a GP incentive scheme that's been put in place by NHS England for at least 18 months now. So GPs are being paid to make referrals. we have seen the referrals escalate to approximately 600 for Thurrock alone. We expect a conversion rate of about 50%. So we are now seeing around about 300 adults in Thurrock going on to the Tier 3 programme. So, as I say, the numbers are increasing. There's a number of factors for that. The key one is the GP incentive scheme. But it's actually really helping people in Thurrock. If we could move on to slide 6, please, Darren. I just want to point out the binge eating behaviour service. This is something that I decided I wanted to commission from More Life in September of 2021. And the reason I wanted to do that is that at Tier 3, we were having an approximate dropout rate of 30% from the programme. And most of the people that were dropping out were doing so between week 12, when they'd completed the first intensive phase, and week 16. So within that first month of going on to the maintenance programme. So I wanted to understand why that was happening. If someone is overweight or obese, it's not a simple matter. It's never a simple issue. It's very complex. And there is often a lot of low-level mental health issues within the person's circumstances that drive part of the behaviour. One of the things that I was told by the psychologist from More Life was that the vast majority of that 30% that drop out display binge eating behaviours. That's not a binge eating disorder, that's a different thing, but binge eating behaviours. So I decided to commission a pre-Tier 3 binge eating service from More Life. They are qualified to do so, they're registered with NHSE to do so. So they work with the person to understand why the person is displaying binge eating behaviours in an attempt to reduce the level of the binge eating behaviours. We have found through the initial test and learn pilot, and now it's in their contract, it's as part of the main service, that we found that not only did the binge eating behaviour management work actually help the individual, we are now seeing significantly better outcomes on Tier 3. So more people are staying longer and completing the entire 12 months. They are losing a lot more weight, and they're able to sustain the weight loss for a lot longer as well. So for less than £20,000 a year for that service, I would say that that's pretty good value for money and is working very well for people. Could we move on to slide 7, please? Thank you. Digital weight management is another offer that's been set up by NHSE. And again, GPs will get paid if they refer to this particular weight management service. Again, this is only a 12-week programme. And one of the challenges for Thurrock, as well as other parts of Mid and South Essex, is the digital deprivation levels that vary across the whole of this footprint. And we have a lot of people who either can't afford a smartphone, do not have an internet access or whatever. Because this is a digital programme, they are immediately excluded from that because they can't use it. So it is a challenge, particularly for Thurrock and a couple of other parts of Mid and South Essex. Could we move on to slide 8, please, Darren? Okay, we have drug therapies that are now available. We have one already which has a trade name of Saxenda. For anyone who wishes to access Saxenda, they must be on a Tier 3 weight management programme because they have to be under the care of a consultant endocrinologist. GPs can prescribe Saxenda under private prescription, but we advise GPs not to, and to refer the person to a Tier 3 programme. At the moment, the expectation is that approximately 20% of people who are eligible for Tier 3 would also be eligible for Saxenda. It's a 2-year programme. It doesn't suit everyone, that even once they've been prescribed it, it doesn't suit everyone. But what our providers do, we have one provider for Mid-Essex and More Life for South Essex, and what both of those providers do is they insist that anyone who is screened as eligible for Saxenda joins the main Tier 3 programme first to take benefit from that cognitive behavioural therapy and that curriculum of sort of thinking about how they want to eat and what they want to eat and when they want to eat and so on and so forth. So we have 3 months running before anyone would be prescribed Saxenda, and then they move on to the Saxenda programme, which is 2 years. There is a new drug which is it's about to be licensed. I think later, we were told June, but it's been delayed, by the same manufacturer, and that's called Wegovy. And that's going to be something of a game changer for a lot of people. That will apply to people who would be eligible for Tier 3 or Tier 4 bariatric surgery. And we are anticipating that 80% of people that would be eligible for Tier 3 or Tier 4 would also be eligible for Wegovy. And again, that's a 2-year process. That's a 2-year programme in its own right. So we're looking at these drugs having a much better outcome for people than only being able to offer someone bariatric surgery. If we could move on to slide 9, please, Darren. Thank you. So, Stanford La Hope PCN Weight Management Initiative. So the Thurrock Healthier Futures Clinic began seeing obese patients in June of this year and has offered this extensive, well, they're calling it a health MOT around weight management and lifestyle. They've offered this service to 2,750 people from both Stanford La Hope and ASOP PCN areas. These are 2,750 additional appointments focused on weight and lifestyle to reduce the personal and societal burden of obesity. Evaluation is underway and it's being supported by the Thurrock Population Health Team, and that started in June of this year and will report after 6 months, so November, and then report again at a year, so June of next year. It's a little bit too early to start measuring outcomes yet because all of these programs take a little while to bed in and to actually see the benefits to people. The obesity project in ASOP PCN has been paused temporarily to identify suitable venues in which they can actually see the people that want to join that programme. But it's a supplementary primary care service and it offers a holistic service that looks at all aspects of a person's medical health and lifestyle. Could we move on to slide 10, please, Darren? The health aspects the healthy aspects for this are including fully explaining all aspects of blood pressure management and issues if these aspects are not followed. So that's linked to weight management and it's linked to diabetes. A full explanation of cardiac and diabetes risk and ways to minimise this. Also, a medication review will be done if that's required. It also offers, with agreement of the person wanting to join this programme, referral to the best existing services for them. So it's signposting into the general weight management offer as well. It isn't a standalone service. As we move forward, we're going to adapt this based on the evaluation and the findings, so we'll morph it if we need to. I've got 2 slides of evidence of benefits. So we've got cohort 1 and cohort 2. So cohort 1 has been seen by care coordinators, they've been seen by advanced nurse practitioners, they've had follow-up with health and wellbeing coach. Cohort 2, again, seen by care coordinators, advanced nurse practitioners. There's been a number of improvements in ECGs and blood pressure and various other health aspects for people that have been attending this programme. And cohort 3 has seen 114 patients with 15 DNAs, did not attend, sorry. They've also been seen by the health and wellbeing coach, advanced nurse practitioners. 5 have been referred to the digital weight management. 5 have been referred to blood pressure monitoring, 24-hour blood pressure monitoring. 3 started HTN treatment, 13 blood requested, 11 were sent for exercise, and so that's just some of the data from what's been happening in the early phase of this particular programme. So that's the last of my slides. I don't know if anyone has any questions, and I hope I'm still within my time slot.
Thank you, Margaret. I'm sure members who requested that would actually quite appreciate it. I'll make sure they are. I'll flag them to the agenda and just make sure they can actually see some of the good work we're doing. It's just a really quick one from me is where we're looking at Tier 3 support. Have we got any ideas of how that would, a new mechanism for referral would work? Would that mean open up to self-referral, or would that more involve the GPs and things?
Personally, I would like to see self-referrals. I was actually having a conversation yesterday afternoon with a couple of colleagues. We need to rewrite the service specification for Tier 3, that is for sure. We have to do that. That service specification was written about 9, possibly even 10 years ago, and things have moved on. But one of the things we also need to do is we need to look outside of health and social care services. We need to be talking to the planners more. We need to be looking at planning applications when people want to open up fast food outlets. We need to be talking to people that manage the high street and the types of offer that's available on the high street for more healthy foods. So there's a lot of work we're still doing, but actually what we want to do is, ideally we would want to stop people having to go through this sequential process of Tier 1, which is things like Weight Watchers, and then Tier 2, and then Tier 3, and then potentially Tier 4, because that's really based on failure, and it makes people feel like they have failed. So what we need to do is get smarter about what the key offer is for any individual using the human learning system that's been adopted by Thurrock Council, actually, so that if Mrs. Miggins, the ubiquitous Mrs. Miggins, if Tier 3 is going to be much better for her and she hasn't done a Tier 2 programme, we should just be able to offer a Tier 3. So we're thinking really quite broadly about how we can make the offer much more personalised and reach a lot more people, and obviously try to stay within budgets wherever we can. So, yeah.
That's brilliant, thank you. That's actually quite welcoming, because I saw the ICB put out there was a press release a couple of weeks ago about weight management. That I saw it went out, and self-referral and things like that, and I thought that was a really good idea, really game changer.
Unfortunately, NHSE did allow self-referral to the digital weight management offer for a short time, but now apparently they've stopped it. I'm not quite sure why.
Okay, well, that's slightly annoying that that decision's been made. I think something definitely worth looking. Joe.
Thanks. Just to come in on that, as you will have gathered from what Margaret has said, weight management and obesity is quite fragmented. It's not the most coherent of pathways that we've got. And because things are commissioned in different places, that doesn't facilitate seamless service planning. But so the Tier 3 and 4 work that Margaret's talking about, there is a group working at the ICS level looking at those services at the moment. And then the Tier 2 services that she's talked about are organised on an alliance, so on a Thurrock footprint. So we also have set up a weight management working group on the Thurrock footprint to make sure that our services in Thurrock are as seamless as they can be and link into those higher level ICS services. So we have got some work underway to try and rationalise this a bit, because it is confusing. It's confusing when you're in the system, never mind if you're trying to access services. But just to say that our Tier 2 services are open for self-referral. So there's details on the Council's website that residents can contact us, and the Thurrock Healthy Lifestyle Service will point them in the right direction.
Just come back and make one more point. We've also in Thurrock got a child weight management working group set up now as well, looking at healthy weights for children.
Michelle.
Oh, thank you, Margaret. That was going to be one of my questions you'd expect coming from Children's Services. So you know, I welcome that. I mean, mine's an observation, really. It seems to me it's a pity that people can't self-refer. I mean, given the challenges people have to get a GP appointment in the first place, it seems to me that it's quite counterintuitive that people can't access this without having to go through processes and systems that are already under extreme pressure. So that doesn't seem to sit well for me, Margaret.
The issue for GP practices is that it doesn't necessarily have to be the doctor that makes the referral, it's the practice. So the practice gets a small payment for making a referral either to Tier 2, to Tier 3, or to the digital weight management offer. So it could be a social prescriber, for instance, or it could be a health and lifestyle coach or whatever. So it's the practice, it's not the individual doctor. So, you know, it's a little bit more flexible than I might have given you the impression.
Thank you. Has any other members got any questions?
So I think it would also be helpful for us to look at the DNA rates. So if we look at the sort of, just in terms of the evidence of benefits, so we see in cohort 3, there are 114 patients, which is a significant number, but actually 15 of those DNA'd.
Yeah.
And so taking forward the human learning system principles to look broader to see why they wouldn't have attended, and also looking at the completion rates you presented earlier on, which actually are going up, but actually to apply the human learning system principles to understand why an individual, because actually if you look at the sort of benefits, they sit within the parameters of health, so they're referral onwards to health services, and it would be based on our sort of understanding of human learning system principles and also the Better Care Together strategy. It's much broader than health benefits, isn't it, and health issues. So it'd be really interesting for us to actually understand what could have been the cause of those DNAs and whether there is a link up more to the broader determinants of health.
Thank you. Yes, there's obviously going to be a whole host of reasons for why people don't attend an appointment. So it's excuse me, it's really difficult to actually pin that down unless you can go into that particular individual's case notes and actually understand then why they didn't attend. It could be any number of reasons, to be honest, Rita. And one of the things that we are trying to do with the new offer is actually one of the cornerstones of the new offer will be that more personalised approach. Exactly. That's already been agreed.
Thank you. Is any other member have questions? No? Thank you, Margaret. That's really appreciated for your update on that. Agenda item 7, we've got the SET mental health strategy. So this is a covering report and supporting documentation for the SET mental health strategy. It starts on page 23 of the papers. We've got 20 minutes for this item, so we have 10 minutes on presentation and 10 minutes on Q&A. I've got Alfred and Maria here to present the item.
Thank you, Chair. Is this working, Darren?
Thank you. Okay, thank you for inviting us to present today. Just for those of you who don't know us, my name's Maria Payne. I'm strategic lead in the public health team with the lead for public mental health within my portfolio. Alfie?
And my name is Alfred Taylor. I'm the Deputy Director for Adult Mental Health at the ICB.
Thanks. So we're just here today to give a bit of an overview of the Southend, Essex and Thurrock all-age mental health strategy. We've got some slides to describe the contents of the cover paper. So it will give a bit of a flavour of sort of the main contents, a bit of assurance about how it links to Thurrock's sort of existing priorities around mental health. And we're going to talk a little bit about the kind of next steps, proposed next steps in partnership as well. I just want to emphasise as well, hopefully you can see that from what's being presented today, but this has very much been a partnership endeavour to get through, and I'll describe a little bit about that, and Alfie will also come in on that as well as we go. So I think I've covered what's on that slide, if you don't mind, Darren. Thank you. So in terms of a bit of background to this, some colleagues may be familiar with 2 previous Southend, Essex and Thurrock-wide mental health strategies that have been developed. So there was one that spanned the time period of 2017 to 2021, and one that was specifically focused on children and young people's mental health, Open Up, Reach Out. I apologise, I've just got the dates the wrong way round on that slide, 2020 to 2025. since then, there's been a lot of national change that has happened as well. For instance, we've had publication of the NHS long-term plan, the 5-year forward view for mental health, and many of these have stipulated sort of quite sort of national sort of change for us to deliver. We have been working quite collaboratively with partners over the last year or so across Southend, Essex and Thurrock with the support of an external agency called Tricordant. And what they have worked with us on is to produce an updated needs assessment relating to mental health. I should emphasise that there was Thurrock input into that. We made sure that it very much highlighted sort of health inequalities relating to mental health and sort of profiled some of our particular needs in this area. There was a lot of engagement that Tricordant led with local professionals and partners and residents and service users. There were a number of workshops, both that myself and Alfie attended as well, and I think there was also other representation from Thurrock in those as well. And what it's culminated in is the development of this 5-year all-age strategy, which I say is in the appendix for approval. What Tricordant also worked with us on is the start of the agreed approach to the across Southend, Essex and Thurrock governance that we want to implement for this. We recognise that mental health is discussed and governed and overseen in a number of different forums across the footprint. And we wanted to bring together a way of making sure that we had a coherent place to sort of discuss and oversee what was happening with this strategy. So we will talk about the proposed strategy implementation group slightly later on. But they've also started to support us with the development of the supporting enabler and implementation sort of plans with some initial priorities, which again I'll show shortly. This is an excerpt from something that's within the strategy, so hopefully this brings together sort of the main vision and some of the main outcomes that we want to achieve. So you will see in the vision that it very much focuses on, say, reduction of sort of health inequalities and improving outcomes, and it's not sort of specific. It very much is also looking to pick up on the wider determinants of health and well-being as well that impact on mental health, to make sure we recognise those. There were, within the engagement that I spoke about, these I statements were developed, which are seen on the left, the diagram. So these are kind of pledges in which we would hope that someone can recognise that there's been a difference in that. And as I say, we've got some overarching outcomes in that as well. Next slide. Again, the next two slides are also taken from the strategy. So this lists the kind of main priorities for adults. They're grouped into 3 themes under prevention, early intervention, acute and crisis services, and supporting recovery. And then for children and young people, they are listed again under the same themes there. And I say these have been very collaboratively developed. I just want to touch on the approval journey that we have gone through to date, and I'm going to bring Alfred in at this point because the first, it's been to a number of boards and different governance processes across Southend, Essex and Thurrock geography, one of which was the in South Essex ICB process. So I'd just like to hand over to Alfie to say a little bit about what happened with that.
Okay, thank you. So as highlighted in the slide, to date, the strategy has been approved by all the ICBs across Essex, namely Mid and South, North East and Suffolk, and Hertfordshire and West Essex. It's also been approved via the executive and governance of NELT and EPUT, and also the Health and Wellbeing Board in Essex. And such, we're bringing it here today, and my understanding is this will be going through to Southend on the 7th of September as well. In terms of just giving some scope with regards to what Maria has highlighted early on, it is in partnership. It's been developed quite collaboratively, and I think it speaks volume to the fact that myself and Maria are here today in terms of presenting the strategy in partnership. I think key to note with regards to the strategy is the fact that it's an all-age strategy, which effectively is inclusive of children, young people, and older adults as well. I think that's quite key, and it's been co-produced and widely engaged as well with a relative collaboration. I think Maria will talk about the specificity of the programs and the strategic basis in Thurrock, and then I'll pick up in terms of the implementation of the strategy. Back to you.
Thank you, Alfie. So just to come back to Thurrock from this, what I just wanted to highlight and give assurance to members is that this strategy, I mean, I appreciate I kind of whizzed through the list of priorities that are in there, but we have done the relevant cross-referencing and mapping with our existing strategic commitments that we have made locally. So we can be internally assured of what we're agreeing to. Some examples I've just put on this slide of, say within our health and wellbeing strategy that we signed up to very recently. There are 2 domains within that, 1 and 3, that feature elements of sort of improving mental health or the delivery of care in a more sort of person-centred way. And I know that's later on the agenda. We know that we've got our Brighter Futures strategy as well, which we signed up to for children and young people, and there's a full strategic priority 4 that's dedicated to emotional health and wellbeing, and we've got pledges within that. Within our Better Care Together Thurrock strategy, there's a number of commitments we've made around within chapters 6 and 7 at least, very much around sort of changing the way that we work, and that encompasses for mental health and for case finding and other elements as well. And just to add assurance from some of our wider partners and strategies as well, it's featured in the MSE Integrated Care Strategy, the Mid and South Essex Joint Forward Plan, and very much as part of the EPUT strategic plan and priorities as well. So hopefully that just gives assurance we've done that sort of mapping across. Now, the next few slides, I don't propose to go into in a big amount of detail because there's a lot of information on here. But what this hopefully will give assurance of is that we have work programmes going on in Thurrock and across MSE or Southend Essex and Thurrock that will cover off the work that's needed to be done within this. So there are vehicles that we have. We're already working with the relevant partners to deliver against some of this work. Without sort of going into lots of detail, some of it is very much at PCN and locality level, some of it is Thurrock level, some of it is MSE level, and some of it is Southend Essex and Thurrock level. Sorry, Darren, can you skip forward to the strategy implementation group?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So key to every strategy is in terms of how we deliver against the mandate and in terms of the implementation. And whilst this strategy, I think in terms of reiterating, is a refresh from the old strategy, I think key to the development or the refresh of this strategy was around the implementation and the deliverability of it. And so the agreement and consensus by partners was to develop a strategy implementation group, which is not a collaborative, but it's a collaboration of partners in terms of agreeing some set parameters and principles around how we will assure ourselves around the delivery of the strategy. As noted in the slides, it is a decision recommending body, and it takes into notion and account the subsidiarity of the place. So places being localities, the local authority, alliances, agreeing to the proposal that not one size fits all. However, I think in terms of the delivery, we need to acknowledge an equitable access. And so in terms of the strategy itself and the key deliverables would be how do we address some of key and core issues, but also in terms of how do we work within that granularity of the different places depending on the individual needs. And so encompasses all that basis. The decision recommending body would have some reporting via the current local governance framework. So in Maiden South, we've got the Mental Health Partnership Board, of which Thurrock has representation. We've got the whole system transformation group as well. Thank you. And in terms of summarizing and rounding up, just to keep within the time, the purposes and the functions are highlighted within that. And the commitment today is in terms of the strategy, but also the implementation group, which would oversee some of the key around the delivery of that strategy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm reading through the strategy. I'm actually quite impressed seeing how collaborative actually it really is. We see some of the key focuses that Thurrock have: health and equality, think family approach when looking at for children and young people. I think that's really quite key and quite welcoming to see. Just when I was going through looking at the implementation, I noted obviously that the one problem with the last plan was actually getting the deliverables and the implementation put in. It's really good to see the group. Just where we're using the figures for, it says we're using figures from financial year 2020, financial year 2021. Was there any particular reason? Is it that's the most new figures that we've got? Obviously, I don't know if that would there have been a COVID impact of those figures been lower, so our baselines are lower. I'm just purely looking at where we look at targeting ourselves against. If I can, I'll refer. I know you're slightly confused. I've referred to page to measure performance improvement. We use financial year 2020, 2021 as our borderline. Page 46. I've got on the agenda. Just curious how those figures, we chose that financial year to use.
Sorry, are you referring to something in the strategy itself?
Yes, so in the slide pack I've got here, page 46 of the agenda, on page 16, right towards the end, on one of the paragraphs I've got printed here, just to measure performance improvement in the strategy.
So I would suggest that because that was the available data, and I think taking into consideration that the development of this strategy started at an onset, and so that predates the financial year just passed, and that would be primarily the reason why.
No, that's fine. It wasn't meant to stump anyone. It was just purely just curiosity.
That's acknowledged. Thank you.
Oh, does any other members have any questions? Michelle?
Things from me. First of all, thank you. It reads well. I guess I always get slightly nervous when I see all age services, making sure that children are very well represented. I would make a request actually that there are separate reports that come about the children's service and what is supporting children's mental health into our Brighter Futures strategy. I make that as an observation. As I said, it reads really well. No one can disagree with anything there. Of course, part of the challenge will be delivering it. I think another observation from me, I can't see any reference to young people with special educational needs or looked after cohorts. I appreciate you don't want every list to go in because that makes it difficult, but SEND is such a huge area for us, and it's a huge area for all local authorities, and many of those children are really struggling around sort of mental health, school phobic, all of those things. So it may be in there and I've just missed it, but I would like to see something in there. And as I said, for me, it's about the deliverables around children's and making sure that's reported through. I know particularly what's coming across our desk every day is an increase and more support required. And I know we've got some good services. Our CAM service are working really hard to support that, so it's in no way a reflection on what people are doing, but I do think we need to monitor what's going on with children's sort of very, very carefully. Thank you.
If I may pick that up, I think that's a valid in terms of point. And just to clarify, so with regards to the children that's been raised, and I think we all acknowledge that with all age, sometimes there is the possibility that children might be in the peripheral, hence the reason why within the strategy itself and the presentation, we've alluded to the fact that the Collaborative Children's Forum is in situ, and that will not be diluted as part of the strategy implementation group, so that effectively coordinates and picks up the children's entity and ensure that that's not missed out. With regards to the SEND, so I think there it will be a slight reference, but it doesn't effectively, because, and I know when I presented to the ICB board, there was a SEND strategy presented at the same time, and it reads in alignment, but it's a valid point to note. Thank you.
Thank you. Just one more thing on that. Thank you. That's really reassuring. I guess I'll say again, I would like to make sure that the reports are very specific around what is actually being delivered around the children's agenda, and I think you've given me some reassurance on that. So I look forward to seeing that come into the Brighter Futures strategy, because it fits very well with SP4 under Brighter Futures. So thank you. Thank you, Chair.
No, I agree, Michelle. That's quite valid. And if we can get make sure that it's separately reporting, just to make sure it fits in completely with our strategy here in Thurrock. Completely agree. Sharon, yes.
Thank you, Chair. It's just in relation to transitions. I noticed transitions is on the children's work areas, but it's not on the adults. And I think I would like to see it put on the adults as well, because otherwise we sometimes end up talking to ourselves.
If I could reiterate again, I think certainly, and one of the key conversations, I think the first inaugural conversation around the SIG transitions will be a key focus, and I think it straddles both adult and children, and we mustn't forget or think it's only owned by children. So again, valid point, and I think Jill being part of that initial conversation was quite key, ensuring that's reflected, so that would be taken into consideration as well.
I had just a separate question about practicalities, if I may. Thank you for this. There's clearly been a lot of work gone into it and a lot of partnership input, and it's very broad. There's a lot in here because it aims to cover the whole remit of prevention through support, through recovery. So of necessity, this is clearly quite a high-level strategy. So my question is, the strategy implementation group, will that group be setting sort of quantifiable, measurable performance indicators that will indicate how we're delivering against the qualitative statements in here? And my second question related to that is, given that it's such a complex environment and this is very much a collaborative approach, delivering on a lot of these is going to require delivery by a lot of individual organisations. How do we hold those organisations to account if delivery isn't happening? How does that bit of the governance work?
So I'll start and Maria might come in. In terms of the governance framework itself, that's in development and it's evolving. The strategy implementation group, by its own admission, has indicated that it would have the relevant mandate around the deliverables and owning that. And I think it's incumbent on ourselves as part of developing the parameters and the framework of that implementation group around what could be delivered at system and what is primarily the responsibility of place. Because if we look at some of the early intervention and prevention, that would primarily sit within place. And I think that's a responsibility and accountability within each our respective organizations around the delivery. There may well be some subset around system entities which are mandated within, i.e. the long-term plan, and there are parameters in terms of reporting requirement. That would be key, but also again, we would want to align our relevant governance framework i.e. the Mental Health Partnership Board, our whole system transformation group, the local authority, or in terms of the alliances, frameworks around responsibility, accountability. So I think that the SIG, by its own admission, is going to be supporting a steer, but also ensuring that partners deliver on commitment, but I don't think it would see itself as owning the responsibility around delivery. I think the responsibility and accountability will have to sit with all of ourselves as statutory bodies around the delivery of the strategy itself.
Can I just expand on the other part of your question, I think, Joe, which was referring to, I think it was about delivery. The slide I didn't get to in the presentation pack highlighted that we've kind of already identified some initial Southend, Essex and Thurrock-wide priorities to focus on as a collective for the group. So these are things like looking at the EPIC contracting, personality disorders, perinatal mental health, crisis, quality and safety, things like that. And as Alfie's mentioned, you know, the oversight and ownership of that is very, you know, it's held separately to the SIG. So the strategy implementation group wouldn't necessarily have the mandate for that, but the people that are that we propose to be part of the SIG are leads for these sort of work streams already. So they would be held to, I suppose, some kind of account by their presence on the group, because the rest of us there would be sort of asking for that assurance.
Thanks, that's really helpful. And I think you're right, it's the people and the relationships that are going to make this work, isn't it? I think for some of elements of this strategy that are around the core mental health services, this will probably be a lot more straightforward. Thinking about the sort of the inequalities element, which I'm really, really pleased to see is front and centre in there. That's great. I think that really is perhaps going to be more complex though. So for example, we know that Thurrock has in recent years had one of the highest rates of premature mortality from CVD among people with severe mental illness. It's going to be hard for the SIG to directly address that kind of thing. It really comes back to the partnership and the relationships at that point, doesn't it? Making sure that our primary care strategies are focusing in on that SMI group, that our public health strategies equally are doing the same, and that we're all kind of linked up. I think this is really exciting. I think it could be quite challenging to make those links work, but yeah, look forward to trying.
Thank you. And just to respond on that, you know, hopefully, say, I know I skipped through some of the key slides that tried to show some of that, but, you know, we've started that mapping, for want of a better word, of where we think the activity and the delivery is happening to try and make sure that that's going to work. But yeah, that's not finished by any means, but say just in terms of the way we're thinking at the moment, that we recognise that there's a lot of work going on, but it just you know, we need to make sure that collectively between us for Thurrock we're on the same page and coordinated with what's going on in all those other strategies, some of which were the ones I mentioned in the bubbles and some of which we know we're not.
Oh, brilliant, thank you. Does any other member have any questions? No? Well, thank you ever so much for presenting this. We've just got a couple of recommendations for the board to approve, looking to adopt the draft Southend, Essex and Thurrock mental health strategy in the appendix, which has been developed jointly with the health and care partners across the geography of Greater Essex, as well as the agree for Thurrock to be part of Southend, agree for Thurrock to be a part of the Southend, Essex and Thurrock set-wide strategy implementation group to support and coordinate collaborative working across partners to implement the strategy. All members agreed with these two recommendations. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Agenda item 8, we're looking at the joint report on initial health assessments for looked after children. This report's provided on page 57 of today's papers. We've got 20 minutes again provided for this item, 10 minutes presentation, 10 minutes for Q&A. Dan, do you want to introduce this item?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So as members will note, this report has been here before around this issue. So Thurrock has a target that 90% of children coming into care will receive an initial health assessment within 20 working days. I think the data in the report will somewhat speak for itself to set out that we are some way from that target. Initial health assessments are a statutory requirement and they cannot be delivered by the council alone. They're delivered in conjunction with health partners. I think one of the things that's quite important to set out is some of the area and process. So the local authority tries to make a referral within 5 days of entry into care, 5 working days, for the initial health assessment to be completed, and then there's 15 remaining working days for that appointment to take place. It has been difficult for that to happen. The target relates to children looked after by Thurrock Council, but that doesn't mean that every child who's looked after by Thurrock Council and enters care is placed within the Thurrock area. So we are dependent on health provision not only in the local area but outside of the local area. The local provision is commissioned by the ICB and delivered by Nelft, and Nelft area is different to the area of Thurrock itself. So when you're going through the data in the report, you will find that some of this refers to in and in-out and different areas, but I think to be very clear in terms of the target, that it relates to Thurrock looked after children, not necessarily children placed in Thurrock. We have tried very hard to move this forward, and one of the things that happened since we last met was additional capacity was provided by the ICB to Nelft, who is our local provider for extra appointments, and that was commissioned out. That has had some positive impact. However, sadly, that is now coming to an end, which leaves us in a more difficult position. You can see, if you look at page 61, you can see what the local demand is on local capacity for IHA appointments, and you can see that increasing. So children placed in the Nelft area is going up, meaning there's more demand on the same amount of capacity. I think one of the things you'll also notice in the report is around our targets and whether we should stick with the target of 90%. It's been missed for a long time. There are dilemmas here. We could say that by dropping the target, we're kind of dropping our standards. I think that's not the intention of the change. The intention of the change is to make progress back towards 90% at the end of it. So 90% would remain the stretch target. However, we need to see consistent progress towards that target, which is why we're suggesting an alteration. I think it might help members to understand the regional position. So the regional performance in terms of IHA is 36.8% are completed on time. So that reflects everything in the eastern region, so from here up to Bedford and over to Norfolk and Suffolk. In the wider Essex area, performance is below 30% across that area. The highest performer in the eastern region is at 73.8%. So we don't think the suggested new targets reflect low or unambitious performance, but do reflect progress targets, if you like, towards the coming up to 90%. There are barriers, I think, to trying to get things done, and I would suggest that the largest barrier is paediatric capacity, and that isn't just linked to our local provider, Nelft. That is paediatric capacity, perhaps in all the areas we place children, and know that there's some work ongoing with NHS England to look at IHA performance nationally. So to give a kind of an example, if we place a child in Redbridge, that's a different health area, that's a different commissioning board, that is a different level of capacity and a different level of demand in that area, and we have very little influence directly as a local authority. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I think the other thing is not by way of any kind of disclaimer, but that needs to be viewed in context of is not that health services are performing worse, it's just we've seen a significant increase in the number of IHA referrals. We were originally commissioned to deliver 100 a year. We're now getting into 192 a year. So you can see that they've almost doubled in the last kind of 5 years. And I think contextually that needs to be considered. I think the other thing that Dan's alluding to is, we are working with the ICB in order to look at alternative models, looking at how we use resources more effectively. But I think we also do need to recognise the kind of doubling of IHA referrals into the system.
Yeah, I think that's really important to highlight. I think the other thing the committee and perhaps members would benefit from understanding is the level of input that we are trying to put in to improve this. It's not small, it is not that we're accepting the status quo. Sharon and I meet weekly to review the IHA referrals along with other colleagues to see what blocks there are, is there anything we can move. And where we have been able to push things forward for some children in key circumstances. So remains a high level of oversight. At 3.8, I've set out some of the improvement routes that we're looking, which partner is taking the lead. I think what is important to understand is this is a wider issue than just Thurrock. This isn't about a local authority that isn't getting its referrals through, or a local health area that isn't delivering. There is a national and wider issue that is pressing on us in this performance area. I'll cease there.
Oh, thank you. I'm just calling back myself because I remember talking about this in corporate parenting perhaps a year ago now, and the concern. But I felt the committee there, the corporate parenting committee, was quite put out, to say the least, by seeing how these targets were. And I recall we were talking about a target of 80%. Then I see the target moved in December up to 90% for the board. It's interesting. We've been bouncing this target around for a year now, and we're still not meeting it. And I know that's not just Thurrock. That's a national issue. But I'm just mindful of how many other local authorities then would have 70% as their target that we can compare with.
So different local authorities have differing targets. I think there's one local authority that's performing at that level in the Eastern region, and they've set their target a little higher because everybody would like to be at 100%. Why not? That's absolutely where our ambitions should be. But differing local authorities are having different struggles depending on their particular context. So something for Thurrock is we're a point of entry for unaccompanied asylum-seeking children. That can create sudden demand in our area. But that doesn't necessarily mean all those children are placed in the area, so it can create sudden demand perhaps in the South End area or the East London area as well. So they will have different targets depending on different pressures. What we are seeing is that performance is very variable. In the Eastern region at Q4 last year, the lowest performer was 0% and the highest performer was 73, and they were outliers. The rest, as I said, in the Essex area, it's just below 30% on average.
I mean, a target's a target, I understand that, but one of the things that I don't think we've demonstrated in this paper, and maybe we need to think about, is, by how many days. And we did have that in another paper, but I think, trajectory-wise, it's about bringing down those number of days over breaches, as well as obviously ultimately achieving the target.
No, sorry, just Joe, before I quickly jump in, I think number of days would be really handy because it's one of those things where it could be you're looking at, are you missing it by a day and it's going down as over, or are we missing it by 3-4 weeks? That it's really important to know perhaps how long that time is, because I'll be more reassured if we're missing it by a week, maybe max, but if we're missing it by weeks to months, then that's when you start to worry again. Joe, no, sorry,
No, I think that's a really good point. Is it a day or a month? That's really quite fundamental to understanding what's going on here. I wanted to ask, though, you said on the chart with the blue line and the orange line, you had an increase in capacity temporarily. How was that funded? How did that come about, that increase in capacity? And are there reasons why that can't be sustained for a longer period?
That was funding that was found by the ICB, whether it's slippage, I'm not sure where they find money sometimes, I'm afraid. But that was money that was found by the ICB, and and we managed to gain private IHA assessments from the private sector. Unfortunately, that provider no longer wishes to complete IHAs. The alternative, we are looking at whether we've got any paediatricians who would like to do extra work, obviously with the extra pay, but obviously we are struggling with covering kind of core provision at the moment, and people are stretched and also tired, so wanting to do extra things on top of that. But so that money was initially in answer to your question, was initially is from the ICB.
So there's a number of issues here, isn't there? There's the sustainability of the funding, but actually if you haven't got the supply side available, then the money's not going to make any difference, is it? But it does seem to me that there's a choice to be made by the ICB here about prioritising this particular group. And when children enter care for the first time, they're particularly vulnerable, and they're likely to have, as this group knows, numerous issues that may not have been picked up and diagnosed previously. So I think there is something about us maintaining the line of sight on this indicator, because it does say something about the quality of care for a very vulnerable group at a very vulnerable point in their lives. So if there is something we can do with the ICB to stress how important we think this is, I would suggest that as a board we might want to consider doing that. But I do appreciate what you're saying, that actually there needs to be that supply side there as well in order to maintain that activity, and that's potentially quite challenging, yeah.
There's peaks and troughs, and actually meeting those peaks and troughs together with obviously kind of providing our other services to children, vulnerable children with significant illnesses is obviously a fine line. And as I say, initially we were commissioned for 100, so you know we've found as much flex in the system as we can. And you know, we basically require more, I suppose, is what I'm saying there, Joe.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'd add on to that yes, I would welcome some additional emphasis to the ICB about the prioritisation and capacity. I think what you can see, so if you look at page 61, I think it's 210, just above the orange and blue graph, you can see the impact. It just so happened that May was a period of time where the additional capacity was available. We had children being placed in the area where that capacity was, and you can see the impact it has. Very quickly, performance improves when the paediatric capacity improves. It's not to say that's the only issue in getting to where we want to be with IHAs. There are other things, but I do think that improved capacity locally assists greatly and will, of course, assist colleagues. I think the other challenge for the ICB is around how they can work with other ICBs where they know our looked after children are, and how's that being resourced as well.
Thank you, Chair. Dan, I'm just curious to know who in the ICB you've had contact with. I'm presuming it's the Children and Young People's team.
So it's Innes Paris who's one of the authors of the report.
Yep, Michelle.
Sorry, it's quite a basic question for me, really, but does it have to be an expert paediatrician? I'm just thinking, if they're not there, is there a system, again, I don't know, but is there a system that can sort of say, well, actually, we'll do initial health assessment. If we're seeing things we're concerned about, then clearly that needs to be referred on to a paediatrician or an expert. But it just seems to me the system's not coping, because it hasn't got the people at that end of the system. Is there a different way of the system working? I guess that's my question, and that may be totally not permissible, not allowed, but is there a way the system could support thinking about it in a different way?
We've had those discussions, and we continue to have those discussions, because I think you're quite right, Michelle. You know, what are we saying an IHA is, and you know, we've looked at kind of skill mixes in lots of other areas, and why can't we consider that in this area? That's above that's above the trust. That's something that, you know, the safeguarding systems within the ICB and also nationally need to agree.
Thank you. Michelle, I think there's a little bit, I agree with you, I think there's a little bit of work the board could be doing, looking at, and especially as Joe suggested, do we need to put a bit more emphasis on this can we have that conversation as the board and with partners to look at is there any way to expand that capacity? Because I'm interested, because where we had that we had it was the right circumstances, the funding was there, it was in the right areas. How much money were we actually talking was provided for that funding? Do we know how much funding was provided in the first place for that boosted capacity?
I'm not sure specific amounts, but it was 100 extra over the year, 100 because obviously we're looking at we've doubled our numbers, so we're doing it. You know, we're going to be doing 200 assessments this year easily. So it's for 100 assessments, Obviously, that's paid directly to the private provider, so I couldn't comment on that.
Yeah, and just to clarify, that money comes from the ICB, so it's not out. But I think one of the things that is important, I mean, everyone's right that when children come into care, establishing their health needs is really important. Children come into care for a range of reasons, so sometimes we've been working with them for a long time, and we do really understand their health needs. Others, particularly, again, the separated migrant or US children, arrive and we know very little about them, and those appointments are really critical. So one of the things that's being looked at is a separate route for them, because they have slightly different sets of needs, but also they don't have a UK or a GP health history that we can go back to. So there is some work being done on that. I think the other thing that's just really important to say is our social workers and foster carers and homes don't sit and wait for an IHA to take action in respect of a child's health. If we're concerned, we get them into their GP, we register them quickly, we get them to a dentist, we get them to urgent care if that's needed, or hospital care. We make those referrals early. So the IHA is really important. It is something we need to prioritise, but I just wanted to reassure people that we do take action.
Thanks. It sounds to me that this is a changing situation, and that if the ICS is looking at it across its whole patch, we need to understand this better. I'm sort of feeling that there needs to be quite a targeted needs assessment potentially around this, because we've got 3 different local authorities, multiple providers, including private and public sector. We've got probably levels of need that differ, as Dan has just said. There's probably something about understanding this a bit better to see if we have got limited resources, where do we target them for the biggest impact? And doing that at an ICS level, we might want to suggest that the ICS consider, because I know the Children's Board could potentially pick that up with some public health input, perhaps.
Thank you. I would also suggest that, I mean, Innes will know what she's doing in terms of safeguarding and such like, but actually, I think the Children and Young People's team, they are the commissioners. And I think in terms of pulling something more solid together, as Joe was just saying, and in response to what Michelle was saying, actually, I think we need the commissioners in this conversation as well. I can pass you the details.
That would be really helpful, thank you.
Pressing the wrong side. I mean, I just think we also need to kind of, and I think it is in the paper as well, there is some work going on currently at the moment at an ICS level around IHA portal, which would obviously keep an up-to-date record of everything across the whole system, that's been led by Diane Cyril.
Thank you. Has any other members got any questions? Just, would I be able to, it may be a point afterwards, I don't know if we'd know, get the data about how many other local authorities actually set the target of 70%, just so I know in my head do all other local authorities put 80 and then actually only achieve 40 like we're at the moment, or are they setting 70 and then setting the stretch target to make it a little bit higher? Just, I'm quite happy to go forward with the 70%, but it's just for my own information to know how comparable are we then to other local authorities doing the same.
Yes, of course. I think probably that would come from our Eastern Region partners, rather than something like the local authority tools and things like that, because IHA performance isn't always a measure in that. So that will probably be the best place.
Thank you. I'll just move to the recommendations then, just to say that members have noted the positive impact that capacity had made at the time, and members are aware of the further steps being taken with the target being adjusted to 70%. Of members in agreement with that? I think I'd just like to add that definitely what Joe suggested, looking at is there a wider joint needs assessment in those conversations. I think that's really something we need to be looking at and pursuing, just so we can get a bit more information. We've been doing this a year in this conversation. I think we just need to really gouge now and really start to understand what we can do to try and improve this bit of the sector. Thank you. Moving to agenda item 9, we've got it's the Thurrock Tobacco Control Strategy. Covering report and supported documentation is found on page 69 of the papers. We've got 20 minutes to this item, likewise 10 minutes of presentation, 10 minutes of questions. Joe, would you introduce this item, please?
Thank you. The full strategy is in the papers, and I'm not going to go through the full strategy, but I have got a brief slide set that will just give an overview of the key elements of the strategy and how we propose to take it forward, and the governance arrangements. The tobacco control strategy has been led, the development's been led by Public Health, but on behalf of the Thurrock Integrated Care Alliance, and you can see we've worked with a wide variety of partners in development of this strategy. It's just to say it is a tobacco control strategy. It's very much focused on reducing the use of tobacco. That's mostly smoking, but not entirely. And although other issues like vaping are relevant to this, this is a strategy that's very much focused on reducing tobacco use and smoking in particular. Next slide, please, Darren. So the strategy has been very much informed by a joint strategic needs assessment that we did during the COVID pandemic, actually. And just to summarise the context, this slide shows that the Thurrock smoking rate is just under that of the England average currently at 12.6%. We have seen quite notable falls in smoking actually over the past 5 years in Thurrock, which is really encouraging, although there is some uncertainty around some of this data, but we're certainly not an outlier compared to other areas of the country. The government have set a target to achieve 5% by 2030, 5% of the population smoking, and our strategy aims to take us to that level by then. This will be challenging, but we are setting ourselves a stretch target in line with national. The diagram there just shows a map of Thurrock. The shades of blue are the overall socioeconomic deprivation levels, and the pink circles are the smoking rates. And you can see it illustrates that broadly, with a couple of exceptions, we have higher smoking rates in our more deprived areas, and that's in line with national data. Thanks, Darren. Next slide. So the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment identified, and this strategy has focused very much on reducing smoking overall, but in order to do that, we're going to focus very much on inequalities within that. Smoking is the key avoidable driver of premature mortality inequalities nationally across the country and in Thurrock. It is the driver of inequalities, as I say. So the groups that we've identified have particular high needs around smoking, have higher levels of smoking and or greater impacts from smoking. And those are just listed on the screen there. So we know that routine and manual workers have higher smoking rates. We know that people with severe mental illness in particular can have very high smoking rates, but all people with long-term mental health conditions have a higher rate of smoking. Adults with other substance misuse challenges also have very high rates of smoking. So by focusing on these particular inequality groups, we hope to both reduce the inequality and the overall rate of smoking. The other key group for us is parents-to-be. Smoking at the time of delivery is still around 10% in Thurrock, but this is a point where we can work very well with the whole family in terms of reducing smoking, so that's another key group for us to target as well. Next slide, please, Darren. Oh, and just sort of click through, thank you. So in terms of these high-risk groups, we know that for most of these, our smoking cessation model does actually work very well, despite the fact these groups may have more challenges in terms of quitting or more complex issues around quitting, such as people with mental health problems. But we know that the model works. So we're going to, I think what we need to do, and this comes back to kind of the point on the mental health strategy that we looked at earlier, we need to be thinking about our strategies in alignment. So for example, in terms of our mental health services, we need to be embedding that smoking cessation approach that we know works within core mental health services and not seeing it as separate or an add-on. It needs to be holistically part of the treatment plan. So aligning our smoking cessation support with these core services, including maternity services, is absolutely key to this. In terms of routine and manual workers, we're also going to be looking at working with employers and having a workplace health offer as well, so really normalising quitting in terms of core activity. Next slide, thanks, Darren. To do this, we will have 4 priority work streams in our delivery plan. Our delivery plan will be a live delivery plan, and we will keep updating it as the numbers of smokers fall, the nuances about how to support people in the most effective and individualised way increase. So it will be a live document. But we essentially have 4 priorities, 4 priority areas. The first is prevention, reducing people starting to use tobacco in the first place. So there'll be a high focus there on work with young people and schools and other organisations that work with young people, but also things like trading standards to reduce access to illegal tobacco. The second strand is around smoke-free environments. Obviously, over the recent decades, smoke-free environments have become much more prevalent, but there is much further we could go. I think this is an area that in Thurrock we haven't done as much on in recent years as we could have, but there are other local authorities, such as Liverpool, for example, that have gone a lot further than we have in terms of expanding those smoke-free zones in the public realm. So I think there are things we can do there as well. The third priority is about helping smokers to quit, and I've already talked about those 4 key groups that we will prioritise. And we've also increased our targeting of services within the 8 most deprived wards in Thurrock, because we know that over half our smokers live in those particular areas. And then the final area is around communications, evaluation and adaptation. As I said, we want to make this a live delivery plan. We will keep reviewing and adapting as we go. And we will need to, I think, tweak the communication messages over the next few years. We want this strategy to be live and responsive to the challenges that we continue to face around tobacco use. Next slide, please. These are just some of the stakeholders that we've worked with. I've mentioned trading standards, a lot of our health partners, but also young people services, schools, and also internal to the council, working with HR, working with premises and things like that in all of our organisations. In fact, it is something we should be considering in terms of our environment. Next slide, please, Darren. So finally, we're asking the board today to sign off our strategy prior to publication. As I said, the specific detail of the actions will be in a delivery plan. We've already got a draft of that, and the delivery plan will be owned by the Population Health and Inequalities Working Group, which reports into Thurrock's Better Care Together executive. So that will be the governance of how we will review this. And I'll stop there, thanks.
Thank you, Jo. Just before I ask anything, does any other member have any questions? No, just a quick one really from me. I'm mostly looking at the increased screening for vaping and young people really, and seeing that actually most people start obviously before 21. Really making sure I'm sure we are working closely working the trading standards. I know I know from my conversations with them so far, tobacco has slowly come down as their from one of their key priorities. It's actually becoming to illicit vaping products and the subsequent danger that then presents to children as well. It's just making sure I really want to make sure that's something we are looking at. Really, it's a gateway for children to start dodgy vaping products to then smoking and say going to 21. I think it's making sure you're looking at that's the target audience that could end up. It's great that we're below the England average, but let's make sure we stay below the England average to hit that 5% by 2030.
Yeah, absolutely. If a lot of our young people start vaping and then move on to smoking, that's not going to help us with achieving our target. I sort of said at the start that this is very much about that tobacco control piece, but I do recognise that vaping is very much related. What we haven't done, though, is dug into those really specific actions around vaping in this strategy, but we are working on that. So there's work going on nationally, and there's also work going on at the regional level between all the directors of public health about we're drafting a joint position statement around vaping, which then local areas can use in terms of developing a more local strategy. The messaging around vaping can be a bit tricky. So essentially, we've kind of got 2 messages that need to be conveyed. The first is adults who smoke vaping can be, for them, vaping can be a very useful tool to quit smoking, and actually is part of our smoking cessation offer. If you don't smoke, don't start vaping is the second message. So we sort of have to separate the two messages and get those really clear, but they're very much different target audiences. So I think that comms strand and that messaging is really important. Trading standards, as you say, really important partners with us on this, both in terms of facilitating the adult quitting, but also, working with young people to stop access to vapes, because vapes are fairly readily available, it would appear, to young people. So, yeah. So we are working on it, but there's more work to be done, so we can come back to you on that.
Thanks, Jo. I'm glad you've made that clarification. It's interesting, when I speak to young people, they think it's more socially acceptable to vape. They think it's better to vape than to smoke. Now, I don't know the ins and outs of that, to be perfectly honest, but there certainly is that messaging, and I think you're right, Jo, it is about the messaging and how we work with our schools to say, look, you know, this isn't a good alternative to smoking, but I appreciate for some adults, as you've just explained, which makes it a really difficult message, doesn't it? But that's the message we're getting from young people, that actually it's okay to do that. It's better than smoking. So, challenging. Thank you.
No, thank you. And sorry for derailing slightly off tobacco control, but it's one of those, I bang on about it, and I know Children's Services will bang on about it as well, and it's a really, really important thing. So I'm pleased that actually there is something coming alongside this at a regional level. I'm quite pleased. It's really good, building on what the strategic assessment from last year. I think it's really hitting the aim. So unless any other member has any questions, go forward. Just a recommendation that the Health and Wellbeing Board note the context and agree for the publication of the Tobacco Control Strategy 23 to 2028 on the Council website. We all agreed? Thank you. And agenda item 10, Health and Wellbeing Strategy in Focus, Domain 3, Person-Led Health and Care Report against commitments for Year 1 and new commitments for Year 2. We've got the covering report and supporting materials provided on page 97, as well as 30 minutes has been provided for this item, 15 minutes presentation, 15 minutes of questions. Kerry, would you please introduce this report?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, you said this is the chance to bring Domain 3 of the Health and Wellbeing Strategy to the Health and Wellbeing Board today, and just give you an update on what we've achieved against Year 1 commitments, and also setting out what we feel Year 2 commitments and to get approval for that, although obviously we recognise that things do change in year, and if there are changes we'll bring that back for amendment. So really just to remind people, just start to remind the board what Domain 3 is about, and it's no easy task really, because it's all around delivering person-led health and care, and this is really the kind of basis or the foundations for our integrated care strategy, which we brought, I think it was last year, to the board and also to Cabinet for endorsement and approval. And it's all around transforming the current system, which is often quite fragmented, fairly bureaucratic, fairly kind of top-down, into a system which actually works around and for people regardless of their complexities, and can work around those in a flexible and tailored way. So no easy task really. And it aims a shift from that process to people focus, and it talks about, and again I think several people have mentioned it today in presentations already, uses something called human learning systems as a way of kind of underpinning the redesign that we want to happen, and that human learning systems is all around, is really kind of what it says on the tin, about making sure that systems are human, and that actually we kind of learn from experimentation and testing, rather than doing the same thing we've already done and obviously then getting the same results we've always got. So in terms of kind of some of the things we wanted to make sure that we did through delivering this, that split into the 4 domain goals, and really this domain links to several chapters in our integrated care strategy. So I mean, I won't go into it to all of them, but it links kind of to chapter 4, which is around community engagement and empowerment, links to domain 5, which is around transformation of primary care, very much kind of prioritises or links to chapter 7, which is all around locality-based and place-based working, and others as well. So it's kind of got a lot of strands in, because this is saying it's all about how we manage that transition of the system from what it is now to what we want it to become. So that will happen over a number of years, but we are making good progress. So what I'll do is I'll just go into describe some of the goals now. I'll also look at Margaret to deliver an update for 3B, which is around primary care, because I'm sure that Margaret, rather than myself, would be better at doing so, and obviously kind of look to kind of get the committee's endorsement and approval of the commitments for year 2 as we're doing that, and then take any questions. So goal 3A really is around, to say, how we establish that system for how we establish the kind of foundations for changing the current system. So we talked about human learning systems. And again, I've talked about the fact that actually it seeks to address the current fragmentation we've got, but it's massive, significant organisational change, and also significant structural change in terms of how we work and how we function. So it's an entire paradigm shift, really, in terms of how we operate to how we want to be. And there are a number of ways which we've kind of started to do that, and how we've started to kind of help to design the systems and the solutions that we actually need, which are around operating around people, rather than expecting people to operate their way or navigate their way around numerous front doors, all of which, or a number of which, often kind of operate in silo, or kind of don't interact. So, for example, you get kind of number of cross referrals when we want to kind of have people kind of undertaking a number of services, as opposed to having an integrated solution around the individual, and removing all of those cross referrals that we have, and numerous front doors. In order to do that, we know that we need to empower staff to work differently. So that's that cultural change bit. You know, asking staff to go and do the right thing, to test things differently, to empower them to actually, you know, not do the things that we've actually put in place, as long as they're not breaking the law, not breaking the bank, and they're keeping people safe. They're the kind of 3 mantra we kind of use all the time with staff. You know, if they're doing anything else that kind of around that, then have a go and see what you learn from it. And that's all the learning culture that we want. You know, go about finding the right solutions. And about focusing on outcomes, not just focusing on kind of delivering needs or delivering treatments of conditions. So in terms of kind of the commitments against 3A for year 1, we wanted to actually deliver a number of what we're calling experiments to test or to get people used to working in a different way around human learning systems. So we identified, I think it was in September last year, we identified 4 areas that were multi-agency, multi-organisation, that individuals often spanned, that we wanted to test through HLS. And those 4, if I can remember them, were around people who frequently attended primary care, so their GP surgery or A&E, both kind of attendances and kind of admissions, exclusions from a primary school setting, people that had a housing, mental health and substance misuse issue, which often have, again, operated in silo. And the last one was a very current issue around fuel poverty, but the impact on health of fuel poverty, particularly around respiratory issues, and how we could again use a HLS approach. In terms of progress, all of those have been taken forward. They're at different stages. We're just in the process of actually, or we've commissioned a learning report. From that will be a number of recommendations, which for year 2 will be how we embed that in terms of ordinary ways of working. And to be honest, without having that learning report back, I know that people that are working, frontline staff who are working in place together, from a range of agencies are already working differently, and someone described it to me yesterday as, well, we don't look at case studies anymore because actually this is business as usual. And I think that actually that's a real signal of the cultural shift we've achieved over quite a short period of time. Obviously there's kind of more to do to evidence whether that is a reality across the board, but I think it's a really good signal. In terms of the second thing we did, we said we'd do, which was around kind of the whole governance around this. And in HLS terms, it's the S, it's the system, it's the stewardship of the system bit. We've got a fairly solid set of governance arrangements in place, led by our Thurrock Integrated Care Alliance. So a range of partners are on that, including obviously the Thurrock Alliance, NELFT, CVS, ePut, ourselves, to ensure that actually key decisions or key blockages are actually removed at that level. So if staff are saying, well, we want to do this, it's mad that we're kind of still working in this way, but we can't overcome these processes or barriers or whatever it might be, actually at that level we should be seeking to unblock or change what's getting in the way. So that's in place, and we've also got a range of themed boards which are responsible for each or more of the chapters within our integrated care strategy. So, and each of those has a delivery plan in place, and also we're in the process of making sure we've got a robust framework for establishing how well we're doing against those delivery plans, so we can measure success in a number of different ways. And then the final point against 3A was around a devolution agreement between the ICB and Integrated Care Alliance. I wouldn't say that we've had a devolution agreement, but I would say that actually the establishment of Thurrock Integrated Care Alliance is kind of a committee of the Integrated Care Board, and with Thurrock Alliance at the head of that, it is in a sense the way that devolution will work. Obviously there was more that we hoped we might achieve in terms of the kind of the devolution of funding into Thurrock, but we have got the Better Care Fund again, which is a pooled fund again against Thurrock Alliance and Thurrock Council. So we have got a number of elements in place, even though we may want to kind of push that as far as possible going forwards. But there are always opportunities in terms of the actual restructure of the integrated care structure at Mid and South Essex in order for further devolution of responsibilities to come to a locality level. And we've also made sure that we've inputted into the integrated care board strategy as well, which I think has also been brought here by Jeff Banks, I think. Again, it very much reflects the key priorities that we've got in our integrated care strategy. So we know that that's aligned. So I'm going to pass on to Margaret for 3B.
Thanks, Kerry. So in terms of 3B, this is around improving primary care response. That includes timely access, reduction in variation between practices and access to a range of professionals. If I can just very briefly touch on the progress made from commitments for year one. As at the end of March this year, Thurrock has a total of 68.76 full-time equivalent hours roles in PCNs, 12 different roles, and the target is 80, so we're pretty much getting there now, and the work is continuing to increase the numbers there. In terms of the additional GP fellows, as at August, we have 2 well-established GP fellows working in practices and another 3 to be onboarded in the next few months. Romy, do you happen to have a timescale for that at the moment? Sorry? So towards the end of September, we're expecting another 3. And again, work will continue to get us up to the magic number of 12. And in terms of clinical strategies, all four PCNs do have a clinical strategy. They've been agreed with the Alliance team, and the central primary care team now needs to basically sign them off. Once they've been signed off, they can be published and then everyone can see exactly what's happening. There's 2 things in terms of commitments and ambitions for year 2 that I'd really like to focus on. First is the development of the integrated neighbourhood teams, I think in Thurrock we're likely to call them integrated localities because that's more in keeping with how everyone in Thurrock thinks about where they live. So we won't necessarily call them INTs. But the work to develop those is going ahead at pace. Some additional national funding has already been given to the PCNs to start this work, and a second tranche of national funding is about to go out to the PCNs. On the 27th of next month, it is 27th, isn't it? 27th of September, we will be having our third development workshop with our PCN colleagues. I have to say, they've all put plans forward for how they see their INTs developing. They are doing masses of work on the ground, absolutely huge amounts of work on the ground. And there's a lot of ambition within Thurrock, within the health services. There's a lot of ambition there in primary care. But alongside that, and to answer the key point under Goal 3B, there is also a lot of work going on under the national programme to recover access to primary care. So this is a national programme, and every ICB in England is required to make sure that much better access into primary care is available to local people. We have, out of the 27 GP practices in Thurrock, we've cohorted them into 3 groups. We've stratified them against what they are already doing to improve access back into primary care. That's not necessarily more face-to-face GP appointments. It could be more face-to-face appointments with social prescribers that they have, with community pharmacists, with, you know, that wider group of professions. We've stratified them into 3 cohorts. We've got one cohort of, how many practices is it, Romy? 5. 5 of the 27 are going to receive intensive support. So in effect, that means that those 5 practices have been delayed in improving access to their services, to their wide range of services. So they're going to be receiving intensive support. We've then, in a normal distribution curve, got the bulk of the GP practices that will receive a sort of intermediate level of support, so not quite as intensive, and then a few that will receive light touch support because they've actually moved ahead a lot further. In terms of the INT developments, each of the PCNs has a plan in place, and the next phase is to help them move from being very operationally focused to being more strategic. What we need to help the GPs get to is that this becomes a GP-led offer and not a GP-delivered offer in every instance, because we've got so many other professions out there that work with our primary care colleagues. Actually, we need to be making much more better and balanced use of other professions as well as GPs. I think that's probably about where we are at the moment. To be honest, we can do an update presentation at some point on INT development if the board's interested in that, maybe in a couple of months or something. Give you a bit more detail on where we really are.
I think we'll actually quite welcome that. I know some of my colleagues would as well.
I think each of these, problem is each of these themes or goals for it could be a presentation or report in themselves. So I'm going to try and speak quickly now because I know we're running out of time. I think goal 3C very much links to what Margaret was saying about how we use the workforce. So there's one thing about actually articulating how we want to work differently and how we want the system to be, to perform differently, but actually, if we don't change the workforce and how they work, then we won't achieve anything. So goal 3C is about how we do that. One of the things we said we would do is around establishing integrated locality work networks, because one of the things we know is if people just kind of get together and start to know each other, they start to have different conversations rather than just doing referrals or kind of, not thinking broadly than their own area of specialism. So we've got 4 integrated locality networks against each of the PCN areas, including a range of kind of, again, agencies, organisations, members of staff, because actually we've now got a number of frontline members of staff and teams that are actually operating in a place-based approach. When I say place, we're talking about the four kind of PCN areas that we've split the borough up into. I know that they're not necessarily recognisable by communities, but actually for us, they're better than actually having a Thurrock-wide approach, and they do start to actually look at what are the specific needs of those local communities, as opposed to actually doing everything on a broader generic scale. So we've got a number of teams that are now working in that way, and a number of networks, and those networks are used for sharing cases, talking about barriers, talking about things that can be approved. You know, again, there are a number of case studies that we could potentially bring if you wanted to see those. The second one's around something we called blended roles experiments, which really means people doing other things that aren't currently in their job description. So you might be in housing and doing some things that are adult social care do, and likewise the other way around. You might be a home carer and carrying out things that maybe ordinarily a healthcare assistant would do. So we've kind of done quite a lot around that in terms of something called trusted assessors. So housing colleagues can now carry out, and other colleagues I think as well in health can carry out social care, some social care assessments, obviously at a low level, and safeguarding is key, obviously, with regards to that. And also we've got OT assessments that are able to be carried out by a range of staff that ordinarily wouldn't have actually been taking place, which means that rather than sticking people on really, really long waiting lists for something that's quite straightforward, we can kind of, you know, professionals can go in, get the equipment they need ordered really, really quickly, and actually potentially save that person from maybe having a fall or ending up in A&E unnecessarily, or then being a recipient of care unnecessarily. So that's a really positive piece of work. The other thing that we said we'd do was actually establish a clear delivery plan. We've done that, and that's overseen by one of those themed boards that I talked about in terms of the governance arrangements, which is our integrated locality working board, which is chaired by myself, Rita, and Manjeet, who's the clinical lead for Thurrock Alliance, clinical director. The one thing we haven't got as far on is around our upskilling our carers to do things that health colleagues currently do. They have upskilled in some areas around something called the Significant 7, which allows them to identify some health issues at an earlier kind of opportunity and try and manage those earlier. But we are working on testing some things that carers can do, for example, the administration of insulin. So what we would aim to do is reduce the number of calls that maybe a district nurse was undertaking, and actually also reduce the number of people that were going into an individual's premises. But again, it's taken a while because of all the clinical governance. Obviously, you'd want to understand is connected, and all the training that we will actually have to do. Right, thanks, Darren. I'm going to rush on. So in terms of other things, in terms of goal 3C, I'll just kind of, the commitments for year 2 are doing more of the same, really, because it's such a big shift. We just need to take that further. So we really want to embed our integrated neighbourhood teams that the PCNs are developing, or the neighbourhood networks, really want to embed those into our locality networks. We want to kind of obviously do more in terms of the integrated way of working, experimenting with different areas, and we want to kind of continue to have ongoing experiments around kind of bringing workforce together. And we've got, again, lots of examples I could give you, but won't because of time. And finally, very quickly around commissioning. We know that we've got to do an awful lot on commissioning. It's fairly traditional. It kind of operates in very much a single service commissioned approach. So we're in the process now of developing a new commissioning strategy, again based on the principles of HLS, looking at different models of provision, looking at actually how we can work with providers differently, how we can develop our market differently, so actually it's more flexible, it offers more choice, it kind of diversifies around a way that people want, and also importantly it's integrated where it needs to be, as opposed to actually numbers of different organisations commissioning similar bits of work, which should be really brought together, to provide again an integrated solution for people, with providers working together potentially, and kind of the commitments for year 2 build on that. So I know that's a quick canter through. I could probably speak forever, but I won't. So I'm going to stop.
Thank you, Kerry, and thank you, Margaret, running through that. It's a lot of really good work I see that's gone on in just 1 year since we've adopted the strategy. Really, just quick, just odd ones from me, just with the clinical commissioning plans for the clinical strategy, sorry, for the PCNs. How likely soon are they to be approved?
In truth, I'd have to ask the Central Primary Care team,
That's fine.
is the honest answer.
That's fine. And then it was just really, I was just going to say the blended working models and things like that. I think that's really key. I don't see why social workers wouldn't be able to stop them from administering insulin, for example, or something like that. It's training them up to do that and providing them the skills. It just makes so much sense to relieve pressure elsewhere off the system. It's a no-brainer. I think it's a straight answer from me. I don't know if any other members have any observations. Oh, Michelle?
Yeah, it was just in relation to children. I know the PCN, it's a question for Margaret really. I just wondered how the PCN funding is progressing with the children, or do you not have anything to do with that?
I don't have anything directly to do with children and young people's services, but I can certainly check with colleagues in CYP to see if they can shed any light on that for you, Sharon.
I just know in obviously north of the county they're in post and in position. We seem to be lagging behind here.
I would need to
MSE.
check with the interim director,
Yeah.
but I'll happily do that and let you know.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks. I just wanted to comment that this is, compared to domain 1 that we looked at the last meeting, this domain is actually really, really complex. We've got some really, sensible sounding goals like, improving access to primary care, but the work that needs to be done to achieve all this is actually really complex. It's firstly, as Kerry has stressed, about people, about supporting people's ways of working, developing them, but it's also about some really technical stuff like commissioning and finance flows and the Better Care Fund. So I just want to say that I'm really impressed with how much progress has been made in this domain, because it was really ambitious and challenging targets that we set last year. And I think it's worth just noting that it's not been easy, but this is really, really good work. And I think it would be good to pass that on from the board to those leading on all of this. Thanks.
Thank you. Just quickly as well, on page 117, the monitoring framework in the back, there's bits of where, I don't know if it may be helpful for the board just to have it filled out, completed, for other members who may not be able to be here who've read the papers. I think that on the back, just where it says progress report, it just wasn't filled in. So that's, if that could just be updated and recirculated, I'd really appreciate that. Sorry, Kerry.
That's entirely my fault, and I'll tell you what, it's because I completely missed it, which is why. So I'm going to be completely open, transparent, and actually say, yes, of course.
That's not a problem, thank you. And as well, just quickly on the thought of commissioning, actually, do we have a timescale for when the framework is? I know it's an ambition for next year, but do we have an idea of perhaps whereabouts within the next year we can start to expect to see a bit more about it?
Yeah, we've already had a couple of meetings just to establish what we think, or how we think we would start to. Because again, as Joe was saying, it's just so complex, just thinking completely differently about how you've done something, in the same way for, forever and a day is just, it's a bit mind-blowing sometimes. So we've had a couple of meetings and we've actually think we've got a structure now. And my task has been to actually develop a bit of an outline. So I would hope, and again, I'm probably being really vague and not answering your question really in terms of timescales, because I'm trying to give myself time. But I would hope that we would have something done by Christmas, even if in outline, because I think what we will have is a strategy which describes the new approach, but then obviously like we've got the detail here, there will have to be kind of a description of actually what actions do we need to start to take to deliver that change. And some of the opportunities will come when contracts at their end. So sometimes it will be around contracting, and some of it will be about funding flows and things that we want to join together, being at a different stage in contracting and all of that. But so we'll probably have something quite high level in the first instance, and then as time goes on, hopefully we'll bring more and more together. And this, in terms of the children's, there's the thing about the all age, which elements should be all age. Articulating that, and again, how should we work around people who are complex so they don't have to have lots of different bits commissioned, but they can actually, so our aim can be that actually we commission something which is around them, even if it's about tasking providers to work together, and we have lead provider models, etc. So I'm probably going on far more than you needed, but hopefully by Christmas we'll have something that we can share.
Brilliant, thank you. Yes, sorry.
Thank you. It's really useful to have that kind of outline day to work with, because I really hope we can have really early dialogue with the voluntary sector around kind of shaping and developing that kind of strategy. I'm just really conscious that the provider sector needs some time to adapt to changes in commissioning models. So I really welcome early dialogue to help the strategy, and also to kind of make sure that there's enough time for the kind of sector to adapt and be able to kind of respond to the changes.
Thanks, Mark. I think one of the things we need, one of the complexities that Joe and Kerry have both referred to, that we need to sort of really have on the table, is that commissioning cycles in local authorities and health are very different to each other, and they go over different timescales. And one of the things that we need to start to do is really come together to do joint commissioning, and we need to be able to really, in a very smart way, identify what can be commissioned locally and quickly but properly, and those things that need, because of size of contracts and length of time and that sort of thing, actually need to sit at a more corporate level. But I think if we do that, we can actually start to make an inroad on some of those complexities, and we can start to reduce some of the transaction and process costs and put more money back into the system, because we're not spending it on, you know, NHS commissioning something that's very similar to something the local authorities commissioning. So there's lots of wins here, but you're right, it is very complex. And of course, one of the key things we need to do is to have a level playing field for the community and voluntary sector. We need some sort of CVS compact or something of that nature.
No, thank you. Does any other member have any comment or anything before we move to the recommendations? I just want to say thank you, Kerry, Margaret, again, for bringing this together. It's really good, and it's, as Joe said, sometimes it may seem, you look at some of the goals, actually the complexity that lays under it is immense. So just to say that the board notes the year 1 achievements and agreed to year 2 commitments for domain 3. All agreed? Yep, brilliant. Thank you. Well, that's the end of business today. Thank you, members, for attending. I do appreciate it, and I hope you all have a lovely afternoon. Oh, sorry, Sharon.
Sorry, I forgot to say that I missed the very beginning, but I'm here covering for Jill Burns as well as speaking for this. So I was her sub for today.